First of all, thank you for joining. My name is Joe Taylor. Johnny and Larry were silly enough to invite me to do this, so I'm happy to go over a document that I've been working on for the past few years relative to the Wabaningo Handbook. I recognize a lot of pretty famous people on this list, and I've learned a lot from you over the years, and I certainly don't uh, pretend to be an expert in patch collecting or certainly Wabaningo issues, although I thought I was before I started making this book. So I got inputs from a lot of people to put this book together. And it's mostly for people who don't understand what the WAB handbook is and don't understand the significance of it, which is a main reason I put this document together. Having collected WAB since the late 70s, I thought it would be, I thought of myself as somewhat of an expert, but I really proved myself wrong when I started putting this book together. I researched a lot of issues. I came up with quite a few ways to compare what's in the book with what I had and what was available, and learned a lot along the way. And I've since become certainly an ambassador for WAB collecting, and I encourage all people to take a shot at collecting the documents in this book. I think it is truly a historical document, and I don't think it gets the press it deserves. Tonight, we're going to roughly look at the first half of the WAB handbook. The second half next week will be covered the next half of the WAB handbook, plus some information on charts describing the difficulty of some issues, what rarity is the most common within the book, what percentage of the lodges in the book are at what level of rarity, and what would a collection cost you today, along with some pretty interesting information on some of the real key prototype issues and special issues within the WAB handbook. I eventually want to put a book out relative to this topic, but since we're all collectors, this document tonight is geared to things in my collection. If I have them or don't have them, I document that. If and when I publish this document, I'll pull out all references to what's in my collection because no one will care, and I'll put in better pictures. Some of the pieces I have are not in very good shape, but that represents reality, so I put those in there. If I publish this, I hope to publish it this month. There's how to get a hold of me. So let's talk a little bit about Dwight himself. So late 50s, late 40s, very early 50s, Dwight, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Dwight Bischel, decided he wanted to put together a book describing the current OA issues from every lodge. It had never been done. He wasn't interested in, nor was his intent to document everything that had been issued or the first thing that had been issued. What's the current lodge emblem that's out there? What is the name of the lodge? Where are they located? What is the lodge totem? What does it mean? What other information can you supply? Which is an incredible undertaking. But with the help of National, he was able to get addresses for all the councils, and he wrote them one at a time and asked for information about the lodge, whatever they could tell him. If they had a sample of the lodge emblem, please send it. And at the 1950 NOAC, he also set up a booth there with the help of National and collected more information. And when he had this book together, he made 2,000 copies of it, sold them for $1.25, and all were gone in a year. Next week, you can actually see the actual order form and some pretty cool information about that. So the book contains region issues, which at the time were very difficult to get. There's 174 order of the year images. You know, back then you had to take pictures of things, black and white photography, and by the time you got them printed, they didn't always turn out the way you wanted. So he had to go through and digitally enhance or by hand enhance a lot of the images just so we could see them. And when we get to those, I'll make that more clear. There's also a section on superseded emblems and totems. The back of the book is where a lot of information is, and people tend to ignore that. But there's identification keys, alphabetical lodge listings, and the real meat of the document in the back, talking about where they're located, what's a lodge totem, what does it mean. A lot of information in the back. There's a link if you ever want to, guys, see the actual handbook. You don't have a copy. There was a reprint came out, I don't know, probably in the 80s. It's also pretty routinely available, but I encourage you all to go get a copy. If you don't, there's a link. But if you just look up online through the Florida OA, www.floridaoa.com, another great website that David Weed and team have, and you can, and Rick Obermeyer's on, I think he's also a contributor. You can see a WOB handbook right there also. All right, let's get started. As I went through, there were a lot of difficulties putting this list together, but I wanted to make sure that when I talked about the real patch, I just give you in black text. If it's anything in blue text, it refers to a WOB issue. It's actually not a WOB issue. So blue text means information. Black text means it's referring to the WOB issue. If there's a red box around the patch, and you'll see that here in a moment, that means that whatever was in the WOB book was altered in some way, and you really can't see that. Paul Myers was actually nice enough to go in and designate all the original 12 region patches that are in the book and give me those right issues. All patches certainly came out before 1953, so the 1952 or before. During the research for this book, I ran into some pretty good information on exactly when the patch is issued. So if I had that date, I put it in there. But typically, I'm saying they're 52 and before. I also put a subjective, based on me and some help from others, 1 to 100 scale on the difficulty of all the pieces, and give you a price point, plus or minus 15, 20%. There's really no such thing as a valid price for anything in the book. But you'll see prices that if you put a swag factor of 15, 20% on them, that probably puts you in the order for what the packets sell today. And that's a WOB description there is extremely common, 1 to 10, all the way to extremely scarce, 91 to 100. This was borrowed from First Flaps in Color by Dave Thomas. I just expanded it from 1 to 10, 1 to 100. As you could imagine, the pieces are no newer than 1952, so there aren't many that fall in the extremely common category, but there are a few. Okay, I think people are familiar with Standard Pennant. They were the supplier of chenilles, certainly from the 30s on, and it's very helpful to have this reference in front of you when looking at the back of the chenilles, so it help you date the chenille and help you figure out whether it's the exact issue in the WOB handbook or not. So that's just for reference. Boy, this list could be much bigger in the people that helped me. But certainly there's some big hitters right there. Steve Davis, Danny Lasquanos, Tim Weathers, Warren Cutchfield, David Ordle, Russell Smart, Tom Quinn, Roy Moore. These folks have reviewed the book. Larry Lane did a great job reviewing them and correcting a lot of my terrible spelling and grammar. He spent a great deal of time helping me. But if I had to pick the top 50 people, that's probably the ones that have helped me. And I'm most happy that they did. Okay, so here's the order we're going to talk about the pieces. This is how they came out in the book. Note that as an appendix section will go up next week, and it talks about some really cool, interesting issues, some of the prototype issues, and talks about the ratings. And keep in mind that on the high end of these pieces, they seldom come up for sale, and when they do, they change hands privately. So there were a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails I had to make to find out what some of the real high-end pieces were really worth. And you might know that a 214 and a 370 moved this week, so those are incredible pieces. Okay, here's how the book starts. Obviously, the book is in black and white, issued in 52. Dwight took pictures with it. He had some help, but in black and white, you can see there was some difficulty, and some of the pictures are very hard to read. Go to that website I listed, you'll see some of them are very difficult to read. But looking at the actual handbook, to the best of my knowledge, these represent the actual pieces in the handbook. The format that I follow on the region patches and all the patches is shown on this page. I tell you what the region patch is here, what is the issue, and here's that subjective price point, you know, plus or minus 20%. And then what's most important, what are the distinguishing features? How do I tell this particular issue from a non-WAB issue? So in this case, I'm telling you, here's the diameter, 73 millimeters in diameter. It's embroidered white felt. Inner border is thinner than the outer border. So with that description, you should be able to pick this piece up. There are other felts, but they're not exactly that diameter. On the 1 to 100 scale, this is about a 24, so that's one of the better region items. So on this page, we also talk about Lodge 2, Lodge 3, Lodge 4, all fairly low in the scale, you know, less than 20. Now, for you Rolodex generation guys, these patches were impossible to get when we were kids. So I can see why Dwight had a hard time collecting them and made sure they were included in the handbook. I know Region 9 that I was in, I didn't know anybody who knew anybody that had a Region 9 patch. They were that difficult. So on the next page, 5x1, fairly easy, following the same nomenclature, tells you, I usually give you the smallest dimension first, followed by the other dimension. So in this case, that would be 65 wide by 78 tall. It's an embroidered shield. In one of the documents I read, it said that thing came out in 44. So I put that information there. If I had it, I put it in. If I didn't have it, it's just 52 or before. 6R3. Since Obermeyer's on, Rick, you might double check that, make sure I have the right issue. Red inner border touches South Carolina. So if you look carefully at that, you can see where that border touches. And Lodge 7. Now, here's an odd one. This is a piece that's pre-52 and it's worth $5. Rory Moore looked at my list and said, for some reason, they made Region 7s, just must have made thousands of them because they're still very common. And this is probably the least valuable piece in the entire WAB collection. Region 8, pretty good piece. There are several that look like this, so be careful. The key is the hat touches the border, but the front hoof does not touch the border. And there are several where you think you have the right one, as I did, and I didn't. Have a careful look at that. There's a Region 9 piece, which impossible to get as a kid. Came out in 48, has a blue 9. There's also one, I think, with a black 9. There's the dimensions. It's about a $50 piece today. It was probably that 30 years ago. Region 10R3, mustache side, left side of mustache does not extend to the inner border. If you look right in this area where my cursor is, there's another one that looks just like this, but that mustache goes out in the border. That's how to tell the difference. 11X2, it is a no-twill, black no-twill cut edge issue, and the gold axe is not visible below the top of the line. So if you look at some other issues right in here, that gold axe actually goes down in the wood. Another one I had wrong. Region 12, 76 millimeter diameter, white twill left, embroidered breadth, which is kind of hard to see in this picture, but you can kind of see where my cursor is. The breadth of the bull is actually embroidered there, which is the key in determining that piece. All right, the meat of the WAB handbook starts here with Lodge 1. The rest of everything talked about today is going to be actual OA pieces, and I'm following the same process here. What is the lodge? What is the issue? And here's that that price point, which I put that in quotes because remember, there's no such thing as a value, but it's not a $500 patch and it's not a $2 patch. It's somewhere in this range. As luck would have it, the very first piece in the WAB handbook is described as red twill. In reality, it's red felt. So that's one helpful of folks getting started. It's a 67 millimeter diameter red felt piece. Be careful, watch how this arrow touches the E, watch how blunt the nose is and how straight the tail is. If those match and it's red twill, you have R7A, and that's a wob piece. The second round from Sanhican is the R2. It's a pretty nice piece. Remember, these are the first two lodges. They were issued a long time ago, very early. R1 predates the Wob Handbook, and it has red lettering and is even more challenging to locate than this piece, which is the R2. Most people are familiar with the Lodge 3 R1. It's the famous three-legged raccoon. Again, mine is kind of used, but that's reality, so I put it in there. If you have a three-legged raccoon and it has a green cut edge, you've got the wob piece. Lodge 4. I had this one wrong. A1A. It is 58 millimeters by 70 millimeters green felt. If you see the two pieces here, A1A is the right one. A1B, which is in my collection, is the wrong one. And if you look at the dimensions, A1B is 49 by 70, so it's about the same height, but look how much skinnier it is. Also, you see this red box around this. That means in the Wob Handbook, when you look at this piece, all this lettering, which you can't see in my image either, is all, I guess he used whiteout, I'm not sure, or white paint, but he drew in all these letters. He drew in the lodge name and lodge number 4 and 1920 is all put in white ink or paint or something. So that is an altered image in the Wob Handbook, and you can see. And well, I'm in slide mode. But if I could blow that up, you could barely make those letters out. So 1950 photography was certainly worse than we have, but that's what that piece is. Okay, moving on to Lodge 5. This is the actual piece from the Lodge Handbook. I have only a few I got from the Wob Handbook when Dwight broke his collection up. This is one of them. 62 by 80 millimeter green felt. The key here, there's no pupils, but something else is, since it's an X3A, can you see right there under his nose, there's a little bit of gray felt? If you look at X3B, that's solid, that's black. So if you want the exact Wob issue, get the one that has a little bit of gray under the lip. If you just want something to work as a Wob issue, pick up the X3B. Pretty good piece. Lodge 6 C1A. This is a tough piece. It has the standard pennant label 6A. I rented that pretty fast. So anyone needs an explanation of the standard pennant labels? Okay, so if you go back to the beginning of the reference document or look in any of the ISCA manuals or Blue Book, you can see this designated, but it's type 6A. It's the only chenille that has a 6A, and it is called C1A. C1B has light orange breast rather than this yellow. Okay, here's a sleeper, Lodge 7 R3. Now, I would imagine most people look at that and call that a $10 patch. I did too. Lodge 7 was extremely large, very large in chapters, extremely active in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and there are hardly any patch they put out that's not common. And I have probably 3 or 4 of these, one in my collection, and none of them were the right ones. The key is no stitching around the hand. And I have a little detail to the right. R4 and R5 have stitching around the hand, which unfortunately that's what I have. If you look at this piece, the actual Wob piece has no stitching around that hand. And you can see what should be an easy patch. I don't have one. I'm looking for one right now. Okay, Lodge 11. It's an odd shaped felt. X1A. Note that X1B has no pupil. If you look in the Wob Handbook, the piece there has a pupil. And I get into this here in a minute, but when I'm looking for the right piece, I go to the reference documents like the Blue Book, ISCA Online. If they give me dimensions, I look at that. But I almost always make a high resolution scan of the Wob book. And then I compare the two. And using PowerPoint, you can turn one a little bit transparent and you can put one right on top of the other. Since it's a black and white book, you really can't use colors, but you can certainly use size. Where do the letters tag? Where does the size tag? And when you do that and overlay them, you can start to become really accurate at determining what piece you have. I did that on X1A to confirm that's the right piece. Okay, 12X2, somewhat unique. Piece came out in 1948, white twill, rolled edge. It's odd that the rolled edge piece would come out before the X3, which has a cut edge. Or maybe they're just listed incorrectly in the blue book, but the rolled edge is the correct variety. Lodge 15X3, again, very, very active Lodge in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This is their X3. They have multiple pieces that look like this. It's important you get one that has a round tail over the T, and it's a very defined beaver, almost looks like a rat, and an ear. If you have that, you got the right one. Be very careful what this 5 looks like also. Where I ran into some cool information, I went ahead and stuck it at the bottom. Here, you can see this little star. One of the oldest lodges in the country, formed 8 years after Dr. Goodman Carroll Edson formed the OA. It was the 15th lodge to be officially chartered. I guess when they come back from a ceremony while paddling canoes across, new airmen saw beavers traveling the same direction. That's how they chose their totem. I thought it was pretty cool. Lodge 19, I think that's from the New York area. It is a felt piece, 80 millimeters diameter, and again, you can see mine's not really very good shape, but that's the way it is. In this case, to make sure you got the right one, the arrowhead points between the L and the O. I show here to the right, here's the R2. That points it right to the O. So be careful if you're looking. The R2 is significantly easier to acquire than the R1, and just look for where that arrow points. 22R1A is the wob issue. Orange twill, thin letters, 102 millimeters in diameter. There's also an R1B. It's a little bit thicker. See the border a little bit thicker over here? I see R1B detail, the letters a little bit thicker. Now this is kind of nitpicking, and Roy Moore's probably right saying we really shouldn't be collecting to this detail. And I would agree with that. But in this case, I've identified 22R1A as a wob issue. Okay, 29X1A, no twill and no outline around fingers. Here's another one where they didn't outline around the hand, and that's pretty critical to determine whether you have the right issue. There's also little dots down here, the lower left corner and lower right hand corner. Those are horizontally embroidered. Here's a classic 33F1. It's about 133 millimeters. I say that because they were cut out, but that's about the size of it. It's certainly an oversized flap. Don't know that I mentioned that, but on each page I've tried to scale them relative to one another. It was hard to make one scale that worked for the whole document, but on this page you can see that's a pretty big patch compared to the 36A1B at the bottom. So page by page they're scaled pretty well, because I just took them and laid one over them and then saw where they lined up. Also, the 33 may have a little single red stitch around the border. This is a piece that's discussed in the Wob Handbook. 35R2. Now, 70 millimeter diameter, 5 millimeter tall W's. The one in the Wob Handbook, this tab is actually cut off. I don't want to cut mine off, but that's the right piece. It's R2. I have a detail telling you at the bottom R3. You see how different the W's are, and you see how different the actual fletching is. This is kind of a single stitching. This is kind of a double stitching, and that W connects to the border in R3. R3 is still a great piece. It's just not the Wob issue. Lodge 36, Nietzsche, A1B. That's a pretty hard piece. Red flocking on white felt. See how high this is ranked? That's a good piece. And they have other airhead issues. A2 and A3 are both twill. Everything from Lodge 36 is good. It's a small lodge here in Texas. Both A1A and A1B are pretty challenging, but happens to be A1B is the Wob issue. Okay, 37R1B. The key item is up here, this E and the W. The E tags the W in the WOB issue, and that's R1B. If I look over here on R1A, see the E does not attach the W. That's critical. If the E does not tag W, you probably have R1A, even older, just doesn't happen to be the WOB issue. All right, let's move on to 38. X1, it's 117 millimeter wide felt. I underlined felt because, again, I don't know how many people proofread his book, but he incorrectly identified that in the WOB book as white twill. But he showed this piece. So for years, I kept looking for a twill piece that matched the WOB book and couldn't find it, and I would never find it. The only piece that matches it exactly is the X1 felt. This is a little interesting. I put it in here, 39R2 question mark. It is described in the WOB book on the page where Lodge 38 is, but no picture. It just says there's a 76 millimeter diameter orange twill. So if I look at what came out in this time frame, that's 76 millimeter diameter. I think they're talking about R2. I went ahead and stuck it in there. There's a red box around it because not only is it not an altered picture, there's no picture. But I think that's what they're talking about. 40R2, this is a sleeper. 40R1 and R2, there are multiple varieties that most everyone has, and I did too. I probably have 4 or 5 of these R1s and R2 in my collection. But when you really look, if you see this white ring, the WOB issue is the R2 and has a ring around the, I guess that's a dove, has a ring around the neck. No other round issue from Lodge 40 has a ring around the neck. I don't know why this is so difficult, but this is probably worth maybe a factor of 10 what the other R1s and R2s are worth with this ring. I mean, I think that if you guys, any of you guys collect odd shapes on here, 40R1, this stuff that looks like this are pretty darn common. So check for that ring. If you got the ring, you got a winner. Okay, 41A1, white twill, no number. Every other arrowhead issued by Lodge 41 has a number, so that one's easy to tell. 43S1A and S2. In the WOB book, they discuss the khaki and the green background flaps. They only show the green one, but they discuss them both, so I put them both here. One for scouts, one for explorers, and the one up here, not pictured in the handbook, is the one here on the top. I have that little white lettering. Really classic design. Both have a red stitch from the cabin to the first W. I think there's about 5 or 6 of this same pattern, including one for Air Scouts. Very challenging group of flaps to get. 46X1, good piece. Look what this rated, 53. 112 millimeter wide, felt on felt, standard pennant label 6. That's the key, but nothing else looks just like that from the Lodge. Lodge 47. If I had to pick another piece for my favorite for Johnny's intro, this would be it. 88 millimeter diameter flocked felt. There are 2 pieces. There's an R1 and there's an R2. Very similar, but if you have a color image of them, you can see the color of the arrow is a little bit different. But this is more of a rose on R1. It's more of a bright red on R2. And if you look at the fletching very closely, look how there's 2 little pieces here, 2 kind of big pieces here. That's different than this. But if you have a 47 felt, it's a great patch regardless. A little bit here at the bottom on it, since it's a cool piece. It was formed and chartered in June 17th, 1930 in Bronx Valley. It means ground squirrel in the language of the Delaware. The Lodge totem was a chipmunk. Great Lodge, great piece. 94. This is probably the best piece we've listed so far. I saw one of these purchased at the 81 NOAC when was it Guy Hatfield had his first issue collection for sale, and a guy showed this to me, and he was so happy with it. And I'm going, it's just a round felt. What's so good about that? I've never seen another one since. Great piece. 48A1, here's another felt. This is the A1. There's actually supposed to be a tab up here. Mine is missing the tab, but that's the way it is. The little cartoon on the right tells you that A2 has different stitching in the tail. If you see the tail stitching different, there's A1, there's the A2. That will help you determine which one you have or which one you're looking for. 49 R1B X1B. It is a closed mouth deer, and it is felt. Sometimes it's sewn with an arrow. Sometimes this arrow is sewn across the back. I've even seen it where they cut the arrow and sew a piece here and sew another piece here. There's an R2 X2 set, very similar, but they're not felt. So if you get this on felt, you've got the wob. Lodge 50 R1A, another sleeper I had wrong. 77 millimeter diameter with 127 millimeter arrow. What's absolutely critical is look at this beak. One of my collection, that beak ended right here where this yellow is. The real wob issue, if you blow the picture up in the wob issue and you overlay known R1s, the one that matches has a 1 millimeter overlay. Now, for you engineers, that's 40 thousandths of an inch. That's not much, but it is definitely noticeable when you put them side by side. Beak extends over yellow chest by 1 millimeter. That's the key. 51 R1C. It is a Kelly Green Thunderbird. R1A has a slightly olive tint to it, and R1B is twill right smooth. So you want R1C is the correct wob issue. 54 R1A. This one's hard. I had to overlay issues and really check this. The key is where's the crossbar on the A. There are several varieties of this, all of which are good pieces, but the crossbars on R1A are high. They're higher up in the A. R1B, see the crossbar is in the A, it's a little bit lower. Not much other differences, both great pieces. 55 L1, you could write a book just on this piece. It is a hand-tooled Thunderbird shape, probably the most highly faked rare wob issue. In the wob handbook, I showed you a picture. That's what they show in the handbook. This thing where my cursor is, it's just a line drawing. But because it's a line drawing and it's hand tool leather, the non-scouts thought, gee, I can make a buck here, and they started making fakes of this patch, and I don't know what you do. Put neat's foot oil on them, put them in the oven, do whatever you want, make them look old, but extremely difficult to get. I would say if you run into one, make sure you have very clear provenance because it's a very expensive piece. Look where it's rated, 99. There's not much better in the whole wob handbook. There is an X2, it's hand painted, much easier to get, but still a ridiculously hard piece. But you won't confuse a real X2 from a real X1. So caution, caution if you run into this piece. And the red box means it's just a picture in the wob handbook. They don't actually show either of these issues. Okay, let's move on to 57. Fairly common issue. It's R4A. It's a white felt. If you look at where the eye is, it has a little eye tag to the back of the eye socket. Lodge 57, very active. They put out a lot of felts that look a lot like this. All are good pieces. All would fit in a wob collection. But if yours is 70 millimeters diameter and this eye tags to the back, you've got the wob piece. 58A1A. Arrowhead name does not tag the inner border. So if you can look at this name coming across, none of those letters tag this white border. If you look at the A1B, which I showed to the right of it, multiple of those actually tag to the border. They're both good pieces. A1A is the wob piece. Similar, 63 R1A. It's green twill right. Bottom of the bird is orange. But the bird, if you look at subsequent issues, they kind of make an outline around there. They kind of change the stitch to do an outline. There's no outline around 63 R1A. 65 R1A, blue twill right. Nothing else looks like it. That's pretty easy to get. 67C6, critical. SBC label 6B. If you don't have a 6B label, you do not have C6, you do not have the WAB issue. No other Anika chenille has a type 6B label. 68R1. I don't know why this booger is so hard to get, but I don't have one. I saw one sell last year for $1,500. I think they're probably worth more. It's rated at a 75. Nothing else really looks like it, but it's a 78 millimeter diameter white twill. Good piece. Moving on, 69R2, 77 millimeter diameter white twill. It's pretty easy to distinguish between the others. 70X2, the first T is offset and name appears continuous. So if you look here, see the T is a little bit offset towards the top, and it almost looks like one long continuous name. I thought there were 3 different names, but Larry set me right that it's actually supposed to be 2 names. So Taktali is supposed to be together, but it almost looks like one long name to me. 70X3 has 3 more distinct names, but you want this one kind of oblong and 65 by 78, so it's certainly not round. You want the X2. 71X1, it's a good piece. It's rated at 64. It's 58 by 94 millimeters, and this one is the key to the spelling. If you see how it's spelled, NATASHI, 71X Lodge subsequent Lodge 71 is spelled NATSIHI. So they're both X1 from 2 different Lodge spellings. This spelling is pretty difficult to get. Okay, 73. Came out in 1944. When we get to the appendix next week, I'll show you the pledge, the brotherhood, the ordeal, and the vigil. These are very special pieces. We'll go over that next week. In the WAB handbook, 73 R2 ordeal, 73 brotherhood, and R4 is vigil. Only the R3 is pictured in the book. So it's the brotherhood piece that's pictured. I don't have it. So since it's about collectors, I put in what I have. When I publish this book, I'll pull this out and put out the actual one that's in the WAB handbook. But they're all pretty special pieces. Rated pretty high, an 82. 75 R1, easy to determine. The A2 has a white sky. Very easy piece to get as an A2. I suspect this is a much shorter run. But even so, it's not really a difficult piece to get, but it has yellow sky. That's critical. 76 R2A. The tail touches the W. Look at this tail coming through here. Just touches the W right there and has tight cotton backing. So here's a picture of the backing. If you had an R2, you'd see that's much more spread out like gauze. 77X2, another very active lodge in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Not particularly expensive because they made so many. The arrowhead does not touch the inner circle. If you see this arrowhead here, doesn't touch the inner circle, and it has distinct claws. X2B has kind of blobby looking claws. So if you have an X1A and has sharp claws and the arrow doesn't touch that inner border, you've got the WAB issue. 79X1 is kind of a sleeper. The X2s, other issues, X3s are pretty common from Lodge 79, but there's no border under the tail in the WAB issue. So right in this area, see the red border is gone. And I'm showing you a little picture in the right bottom. X2 and X3, the border's kind of bent down a little, but you can see it. So if you want to collect the exact WAB issue, get the one that does not have anything under those feet. It's a good piece. That's rated 46. 81 A1, pretty common. They made a lot of stuff very similar, different shades of buffalo. The WAB issue is 71 by 93. It's green twill, a dark brown buffalo. But also look in this corner. Some of the other issues, this is a rounded corner. Like down here, A2 has rounded inner border. See that, how rounded that is? A1, that's a sharp border. 84 R1A, right eye does not touch the beak. So if you blow this up, here's the actual wob image to the right. You see that eye doesn't touch the beak. The eye does not touch the beak in R1A. R1B and R1C touch the beak per ISCA-OE images. Blue Book states the eye does not touch. The ones I see, they do. So I think there's something wrong with the Blue Book there. 89A1A, very interesting story. Bob Rudd sent me pictures of the Trader magazine from the 1950s when his father was the absolute king of patch collecting, and 89A1 was the most difficult piece to get at that time. They were one per person in the lodge. Nobody traded it. Nobody even asked them to trade it. So pretty interesting side story on Lodge 89. 91 X1A is the wob issue. The fletching is made in one part. I'm showing you X1B to the right. You can see the fletching is stitched in two different directions. The wob issue isn't stitched like this arrowhead. It's stitched in one piece. Let's keep pushing. 96 X1A. That's a pretty good piece. Wisconsin piece. X2 has white twill. So if you look here, the Wisconsin is yellow in the wob issue, and it's white twill in the X2. Both good pieces. 99A4. I was in this lodge when I was in college. All the arrowheads are pretty difficult. This is embroidered felt, 63 by 83. Not many others look like this, so it's pretty easy to determine. Lodge 101. So this is the lodge where I currently live here in Dallas. And when I moved here around 2000, being a wob collector, I said, "Oh, I'll have no problem. I'll pick up the wob issue when I move to Dallas." No, it's hard. This guy has got no stitching around the eye. I mean, on the head. All the other subsequent arrowheads have stitching around the head and the ears, and they're pretty decent pieces. But this guy is very tough. It's the only one I've had a chance to get. So look for the stitching around the eye, around the head for the wob issue A1A. 103X3, rated 33. It has a dark blue border and a brown eye and a red arrow. Notice that X4 has a black eye. So have a careful look at the eyes if you're trying to determine wob issues on 103. 104, pretty easy to tell. The middle W is shorter on the outer legs, and the arrowhead tags to the inner border. See the arrowhead right there? So 77 millimeter diameter, green twill left, 104 R1, that's a pretty good piece. 107 X1, again, mine is ragged out, but that's reality. Here's a picture of mine. It's 80 millimeters, 85, light green, twill left, rough. Note there's X2A and X2B are no twill. So look for the twill. Similar on 108 R2, 70 millimeter diameter, beading around the fox head. So beading means that right around here, they kind of change the direction of the stitch. And it's hard to see in this scale, but if you blow it up, you can see it. R2B is no twill and could also be a wob issue because you really can't tell in a black and white picture. You can't see that level of detail. So I'm waving the flag saying, if you have R2A or R2B, I'm saying you have a wob issue. Pokagon, Pakagon, 110A1. It's 112 millimeter by 127, white twill right, and notice these two W's. The lower W's tag the owl, and the center tail feathers tags the second one in 110. So no other arrowhead issue, and they made a bunch, no others have the one tag and both W's tag the owl. That's all you got to look for on that one. 111 R2, 77 millimeters diameter, no tags from WW to the border. So you look up here, no tags. This picture in the bottom right shows you R2B. The W's all tag the border. Both great pieces. R2A is the wob piece. Here's another piece when I moved to Texas. And by the way, I grew up in Texas and collected this as a kid, all Texas issues. And I have multiple hat-shaped patches in 113. So I thought for sure I had the wob issue. And after I got out of school and moved back to Texas, I thought, well, I'll pick up the wob issue now. This darn thing is difficult. No shaft in the fletching. Right in here I'm showing, if you look at the real piece, It's just like a solid stitching. Whereas the X2, X3, and X4, you see there's a direction for the fletching here and a different direction for the fletching there. Pretty good pieces, but pale in comparison to the Wob issue. So that's a challenging piece from the Wob Handbook to get from Texas. One of the more difficult from Texas. 117A1, there's another Carolina piece. Mine is kind of messed up. Orange twill right, 5mm border, which is a thick border for such a small patch. The deer has 3 legs. If you look at other issues, deer has 4 legs. I think there's another Carolina piece. 118 R1A, 76mm diameter, twill left, brown details. Note, the R1B, R1C varieties are twill right and different shades of brown. All right, 120F1, nothing else looks like it. That's a pretty easy one to determine. It's one of the few flaps in the Wob Handbook, but there it is. 123 R3B, another very active lodge in 30s, 40s, and 50s. They made lots of rounds, but this is 74mm diameter, white twill right, so the twill runs this direction. No tag between the G and the E of lodge. So right here is where you got to look. The G and the E of the lodge. And periods tagged to the border only. So look where the periods tag, look where the tag is, G and E. They're all pretty easy to get, but that's a significant piece to determine if you want the Wob issue. 125 R1. Nothing is easy from 125. All the flaps are hard, all the neckerchiefs are hard, all the odd shapes are hard. The little Pennsylvania coal mining town and the lodge advisor was a big believer in 1 per life. So nothing is easy, but if you want R1, it's no shaft in the fletching again. 75mm diameter, red twill right, no shaft in fletching. Here's a picture of R2A, R2B, R2C. You can see a direction to the fletching. All are difficult. 127 R1, nothing else looks like it, but it's a booger to get, and mine is kind of chewed up in the edges, but I'm still most fortunate in my mind to have it. Red silkscreen on white felt. 128A1, see the size of that. That's a pretty big piece compared to other pieces on that page. So 126mm tall. There's some other ones in lodge. They are dramatically different size. So if you just check that size, you're fine. 129R1, white twill right, arrow right points to C. See this arrow right here? It points at the C. R2, you can see it points up here at the I after the C. Pretty minor detail, but that's what this document about. It's talking about anything that's minor and how to see it. 130C2A, another one that I got this at the 77 NOAC from a guy in this area saying this is the Wob piece and da 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 da. I had the wrong one. It is C2A and it has standard pennant label 6.5. 6.5. They also have labels 6B, 7, and 8C. So they made a lot of chenilles in this lodge. And they look similar to this. You kind of look at where the nose is and the eyes, but they basically look the same. All good patches, but the C2A is the Wob issue. R1A from Lodge 32, diagonal stitched cardinal, and R1B is no twill. R1C has vertical crown on the cardinal. Pretty good patch. Okay, here's another Carolina piece that's a sleeper. 76mm diameter, and they made several like this. Dark green, which you really can't tell from the Wob issue, but the key is right here. If I look at the top of this bow, the real Wob issue, there's nothing from the top of the bow to the W. In the top right, I'm showing you the R1C. No, I'm sorry, no tag to the W. Look, we're looking at R1C. That's what you want, no tag. In R1A, B, and D, there's a little tag from the top of that bow to the W. And it's hard to tell in this picture, but this is more of a metallic green in the R1C, and the other R1s This is a different green. I don't know what kind of green that is, but not the same. So if it looks a darker green and there's no tag from the top of the bow to the W, that's a pretty good piece. I had to look for a while to get that one because I had this one in my collection. I had an R1, I think an A. Similar tag information on 140 R1 is you look at the tag here from the bottom of this arrowhead. Red arrowhead tags border at bottom, right there. No arrowhead on border tag on 140 R2A and R2B. Right there, there's no tag. That's the critical piece. It's a pretty easy piece though. I don't know why, but that piece, and pretty easy, along with 142 R1A is pretty easy. Main thing on R2A is where does this arrowhead, where does this fletching line up? It should end halfway over the E in Lodge. There's others that end the first part of the E and just below the E. They made a lot of rounds. All are pretty easy to get. But that's the one you want to get if you want a wild piece, is the one that sits over the center part of that E. 146 X1 is easy to tell because there's no WW in this pine cone. Right there, X2 has a WW right across there. Pretty large piece. You see it's 100 millimeters wide, so the scale is about right on this page. 148 X1A. Nothing else is really close. Now the blue book says X1B has white feathers, but I have seen the document describing the 1948 Area 9C conference patch, and that's what that patch is. So I'm not sure whether blue book is wrong or they want to count this as a region piece, as an area conference piece, and an X, but not sure. But X1B has white feathers and is the first Area 9C patch in 49. The one you want as a wob issue, you see these little triangles or squares underneath the feathers are blue and they're square. Blue feather details. Pretty good piece. 151A1. This is a stumper. This is a nose wrinkler. I don't have this piece. It is dark orange face, thin eyebrow above the nose. 152A2 has an orange face rather than dark orange. I'm still looking at this piece. I'm not convinced that we know what's going on with this piece yet. More information to come on that one. 152A1, felt, embroidered felt. That's a booger of a piece. 64 by 80, nothing else looks like it, so it's pretty easy to determine. 162 R1, another one of those lodges that was very large, so they had lots of pieces that came out, but red twill right, light green details. Other R's have green details. Okay, 160 F1A, really classic looking flap, dark green border, head under the O. So if I look at his head, which is that little odd shaped thing right there, it falls right under the O. That's critical. The U of the name is 9 millimeters, so we see it's a pretty big name here. In F1B, so here's F1B and F1D disclaimers. F1B is a 7 millimeters U. F1D has 2 millimeter legs to the W's. And a 7 millimeter or 2 millimeter wide W legs. So these talk about F1B, C, and D and let you distinguish, because what you want is F1A for a wild issue. And when you see them, when you pull them up in ISCA, they're pretty easy to see those differences. 76 S1A. A first flap rated 10. Mine's a little smudgy here, but again, it's a hard patch to get. Cut edge, one red drop, and a blob rosette over here. There's an F1 that looks similar. No cheek line, dark orange face. Dennis Sidowski actually saw this collection when he went through Dwight's collection. He says he remembers a piece having a slight a slight green tint to it. So more information to come. I don't know. 78 R1A. C, I, and L of council tag the top. That's what's critical. R1A, right here. C, I, and L all tag. There's an R1B where that's different. 179 R1, I don't think there's anything else close to that. White twill left, red cut edge, 75 millimeter. Same thing with 180. I don't think there's anything else close to it. R1B has legs and feet that appear as one. If you look at this and you can kind of see there's really 2 feet there. 184 R1, if you look at the wob issue around the whole perimeter of the beaver, there's no stitching. There's no different direction to the stitching. But if you look at R2, there's beading detail. See that little detail around the tail? That goes around the whole beaver. So if it has a beading around the perimeter, you have R2, a good piece, but R1 is the wob piece. Here's another sleeper. If you really look at the Wob Handbook, and I did, I took this piece, I made a very precise blow up of it and made it half transparent, started pulling over issues. This little piece of the sash right here in the wob issue comes below the shirt, right there. And his shirt over here just about touches. So the left sash extends below the body. The shoulder touches the first O. All right, that's R1B. And here's a detail of that shoulder detail right there. And the reason that's important is because you see I've outlined this in red. He had to go back and by hand, he went and outlined this piece to make it easier to see. These colors, dark red against dark blue, did not show up well in the handbook. So he went and actually he drew around the sashes, he drew around the body, he drew around the sky. But that's the piece, that is the actual piece that matches the Wob Handbook. Look for that, just look for that sash below the shirt. That's probably the most important thing. 190 R1, there's nothing else really close, 73 millimeters diameter, cut edge. It's pretty easy to determine. Same thing, 191 R1. The R2 has the name in the top 2/3 of the patch. See, this one ends between 9 and 3. The R2 starts down here around, I don't know, 8 o'clock and comes around to more like 4 o'clock. 197, there's 2 197s in the Wob book. We'll talk about the next one next week. The one that shows up first is designated at A1. The one in the back of the handbook is called A2, and it's in the superseded emblem area. So we might have this designated wrong. But 192 is red twill, right, with gray details. And when Dwight put the book out, his information was that piece had already been issued. So I'm going to go by the blue book, chase A1, but it may not have come out first. 204 A1, white twill right, has a number 104. So there's a similar C1 issue. It's a C1 chenille. So obviously the one in the Wob Handbook is not a chenille, but it has the right number on it. 212 R1, pretty easy piece to get. 72 millimeter diameter red cut edge. I don't think it's anything that's close. That one's pretty easy to distinguish. Well, here's a booger. 214 X2. I had some help with Roy Moore on this one. I don't know if Roy is on, but I believe he's right. Felt on felt orange flock design. So I think that's right. Felt on felt. I think that 214 X1 is actually composition sewn to composition. All of them are incredibly hard. I still need to do a little more work on this one, but obviously I don't have it. It's ranked very high. I think Dwight was actually in this lodge. I think it was a very small town somewhere in Michigan when they were building battleships in the war, so it had a very short life. But nothing from 214 is easy. But I believe the one that you want is felt on felt. 215 A1. It's an only round non-event patch from the lodge. So if you have a round patch and it's not an event, you've got the R1 from 215. 217 R1. Pretty uncommon 217. I mean, their flaps are good, but this round is particularly tough. 77 millimeter diameter white twill right. 218R21, not too difficult. It is orange twill right. Similar R1B is twill left. So if your twill runs this direction and it's orange, you're sitting on the wob issue. 220X1A, you got to look for the SBC label in the back. It's a type 5 label. It's a white felt on felt with red stitching. Pretty small piece. If you look at the scale on this page, the 225R2 is very small, 51 millimeters diameter. This guy is about 65 by 71. This 221R1, which is this is a booger. It's pretty big, 127 millimeters diameter. Now, Johnny, am I remembering this wrong? Did you actually trade one of these for a car when you were a kid?
I borrowed against my car to buy one of those.
Okay.
Two
I knew
other
there was some
patches.
story like that. I think it was sewn in neckerchief with 50 NOAC. So that's a tough piece. I don't know why. Maybe they didn't have many people go into the NOAC, but I remember Johnny told me that story back in the 70s. So if you got to trade a car for one, it's a pretty good piece. 225R2, a holy grail piece from the West Coast, small, 51 millimeters diameter, orange twill on sateen. I don't know why it's so hard. You can get an R1, you can get an R3, but R2s are hen's teeth. 227 R3D, not too difficult. Dark blue twill left. Similar R3, R twill right. Another great California piece. 228A1. This is a silk screen sateen, typically folded. So I turn it over, you can see the back that this could be unfolded and ironed. I didn't have the heart to do that, but mine has been sewn. I think they're typically sewn on a neckerchief that's half red and half white. Mine is not. But I don't know why it's so hard, but that's another very difficult issue from California. 229 A1A, a good piece from Georgia. It has no number. That's the key thing on there. I'm pretty sure the A2 has a number, and the A1 does not have a number.
Correct.
But they're both pretty darn good pieces. 232 X1B, there's two different twill varieties. X1A is twill right. Looks just like this one, but twill left is what's in the Wob Handbook. And in some cases, if you just take a magnifying glass to the Wob Handbook, you can see the twill. You can see what letters tag each other or tag the border. That's usually the first thing I did, is take a big magnifying glass and see what else I can determine from the Wob book with just a magnifying glass. 233 R1, twill right, arrow fletching notched at the bottom. So we see right in here, that arrow fletching has a notch. If I look at the R2, it's almost straight across. That's the key in determining whether you have R1 or R2. There you go. Next week, there are fewer lodges to cover, but we can get into some of the cool stuff in the back.
Let me share my Wob trivia.
Okay.
The primo member is Ivan Ferentz. He moved.
That's Rick Obermeyer. I recognize that voice.
Yeah, he moved to this council in 1945. He later became Tippesau's first vigil, and he collected patches. And when he went to NOAC, he took his collection with him, and he was showing it. And he says, the young man says, "Wow, can I borrow your collection and take it home to make photographs of it?" Ivan, being a good guy and trusting the Boy Scout, said, "Yeah, sure. Here you go. Take it, borrow it." 6 months later, he hadn't gotten it back. A year later, he hadn't gotten it back. 2.5 years later, he got it back with a Wob book.
I've never heard that story.
About a third of the patches pictured in the handbook are out of Ivan Ferentz's collection.